I started off this morning talking about how much we were friends, and now, it doesn't seem like so much. I will preface this talk to say that it will be quite technical, and if you're feeling a little bit tired, you may end up falling asleep, and that's quite all right. I won't wake you up. We'll go have dinner without you. I'm going to go ahead and try and speed this up as much as possible, and I really want you to get just the content that I feel is most valuable. The things I want to talk about, that I wanted to talk about: automation, continuous database, bulk update, touch base on GDPR, just a touch, and then talk about skill and give you some reassurances that all of the efforts that you've done in the real world with your web customizations aren't going away anytime soon. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Just a quick review of this year: CRM, script, structs. Svata did a fantastic job talking about that. In addition to the service triggers he showed you, one thing that you guys didn't give him enough credit on, I think, was the work that he put into him in both the online environment to make sure that you guys get the HTTP functionality so that you can call out the REST web services and bring data in. Was that cool or what? That was very cool. In addition to that, all of the work that went into finally releasing SuperOffice, the REST support, the RESTful APIs that we've got in place using the web API infrastructure. Finally available by default. We've been talking about it year after year after year. Finally, you've got it in your hands, your capabilities today, and really looking forward to seeing where that goes. Couple things. I need to go back and talk about the IIntegration ServiceConnector. We released this well over almost 2 years ago. In online, it was about 1.5 years ago. And the way that you configure this thing, of course, is here inside the admin client, you specify your connector using a HTTP URL. And then we also implemented a integration service connector authentication interface so that we could make online more secure, and now you're using an app ID sort of workflow. So now whenever the customer's tenant needs to be able to conduct some sort of ERP synchronization, it's going to talk to the application authorization service, which is kind of like you register an app in the online environment, but it sort of securely holds the URL of where your tenant is going to connect to your ERP connectors. And we believe that this is a much more secure solution going forward in the future. And I was going to walk through the whole process here. After the application authorization service receives a request from the customer tenant, it goes out, authenticates with the ERP connector to make sure this is the right connector. We're using certificate, security in between, making sure that you are who you really say you are. Once we get the information back to the tenant, then the tenant can finally connect to the ERP connector and exchange data. Now, this is an interface that, again, I've said it is much, much more secure than just putting in a URL inside the web admin client. We really want you to stop doing that. So we're going to give you 6 months before we stop allowing you to put in a URL with HTTP. So on May 1st of next year, all ERP sync connectors must support this authentication interface. It's very simple. It's one method. I know you guys got a lot of things to do, but it's been a year. It will have been 1.5 years. So it's plenty of time in order to get this stuff going. I don't mean to sound like the bad guy. I really don't. So moving right along, REST web services. This is available for you by default in on-site installations as well as in the cloud. You can see a couple examples here with how to use it. Yourserver.com, sales and marketing, and then WAC API. It's exactly the same thing in online for the customer installations as well. In online, we also added the capability for you to persist navigational state or any sort of SO protocol state. through an authentication. So when you're going to authenticate your applications or integrations, you can pass in an SO protocol via a state query string, and that state will be persisted all the way through the request so that when the client is shown, that navigation or SO protocol will be invoked. Small detail, but something I think is overlooked. When it comes to CRM Online, we've now got a website that you can go to and check out the status of the services. So if you're experiencing any problems, go ahead to http://status.superoffice.com. The state of web services with each new release is sort of incrementally improving upon what is out there. A lot of people, when you install SuperOffice 8.0, a lot of people will point their web service endpoints to the Services 80 endpoint, and you can check, and more than likely you're going to have higher numbers of web services available. So you can have Services 81, Services 82, Services 83, and Services 83 is what's available in production right now in online. Soon it's going to be Services 84. Basically what this means is Services is growing at a faster rate than the product versioning. Now this is something that we're giving some thought about because you really shouldn't have to think about these things. So we want to make that a little bit more simplistic and intuitive. What we do want to see is partners doing integrations that at least keep up to a couple different versions behind. Everything that you've done, all the code that you've written against Services 75 will work if you change the URL to Services 80. There's backwards compatibility there. If you go and you just increment that from Services 80 to 81 or even to 82, it will still continue to work. If the agents to say get contact entity or get project entity, those things just work. You don't have to really think about it. The new versioning numbers basically add methods. We're not taking anything away, and if we do, we'll let you know about it. Just a quick little preview of what that status website looks like. Continuous database development. This is probably where I've been spending the most amount of my time this year, just trying to get my head around it so that I can know it well enough to be able to show it and demonstrate it to you. But what is this? It's not something that SuperOffice just sort of pulled out of its hat and decided to create in order to make all of your integrations that used to use the dictionary SDK complicated. We've tried to do it in such a way to make it simple and easy. And all of these standards or all of these concepts that we're introducing are based on research that had been done long before we came along by this guy called Pramod. Martin Fowler, finance guy, they both work at the same company, and they began to conduct some coordination in order to make it better. They've coined this phrase, evolutionary database design, and we've taken it, which is more written towards database administrators in a way that they use SQL scripts in order to keep databases up to date and make incremental updates to their database schema changes using SQL scripts. Now we don't do that. We use compiled code. It's similar, but the concepts and the methodologies are very, very similar. When you look at Wikipedia for evolutionary database design, it's got a few key pointers here. We want to be able to do incremental improvements to the database schema so that it can be continuously updated along an application's lifecycle. We also want to be able to support multiple access, or so that people can do simultaneously changes to a database without interfering with each other. We want to promote automated refactor and continuous integration within that process. and we also want to be able to do the exact same procedures in development, staging, and production. It's not just for changing the database schema either, it's also for being able to import data into the database, priming data, but also to do database manipulation. Take, for example, you have an application, you have it deployed, you've created a table, it has a field that maybe acts as a key and it combines two fields into one. Later on in that application's lifecycle, you decide that you want to split that apart. So then you're going to create a new field in that table and you want to programmatically go through all of that data, split that data off, and then seed that data into the correct fields. You can do that with continuous database. So how does it work? Basically, you create some compiled code that defines a dictionary step with a given name. Any one of these given names for a dictionary step can have any number of step numbers. Whenever you're going to introduce a new step, that is going to be step number 1. The next step that you're going to introduce is going to be step number 2. After number 2, you cannot introduce step number 4 because 3 becomes before 4. Anyways, you compile these different steps, and all of these different steps can do different things at different times. Step number 1 is going to create tables. Step number 2 might be responsible for modifying some of those tables and bringing in some seed data. Step number 3 could strictly just do some of that custom data massaging that we talked about before. They don't necessarily all have to make schema changes, data imports, or custom data massaging. They can do one or the other, all 3, or just a couple at a time. So here, let's say I've got 2 examples, or 2 compiled assemblies. Could be one assembly that contains 2 different dictionary steps. Each one of those dictionary steps has more than one step. SuperOffice has 3 here, and then Partner Tables has 2. When I use a deployment tool in order to apply these changes to the database, they get implemented or applied in sequence. Then afterwards, the information is applied inside the database. It updates the database representation of what the data model or the database schema looks like. Okay. Inside SuperOffice 8.1 database, when you do a clean installation, it no longer has the conceptual tables or any of that stuff. I'm going to go much, much further in depth on this tomorrow, but just be aware of this. There's a new table called database model, and this is where you're going to find a nice jumbled representation of what the database should actually look like. I'm going to go into detail again tomorrow and show you what this looks like. When you apply these changes, these dictionary steps to a database, you can do it in 2 different ways. You can either use a tool that we've created, one that you create yourself, or of course you're going to write some code and you can do it that way. The really cool thing about this is that when you write code in order to deploy your dictionary steps, you're going to be using the exact same libraries that we use. Server setup uses the superoffice.cd libraries. DB setup uses the exact same libraries. You can create these tools, deploy them within your applications, and so we have this synonymous, we have a very similar way that we work with information. So how do we expect you to be able to work with this? The first thing you got to have is an idea, right? You think about, hey, I've got this great idea, I want to do this integration, but it requires more data or tables in my database. So the first thing you got to do, it's the same everywhere you go, you got to sprinkle some fairy dust on your boss's mind to make him think it was his idea. And once you do that, then you get the green light, and then you're good to go. The way that this works is the developer workflow is you know you have a change that needs to be made. The first thing you want to do is take a backup of that database because you're going to be changing it. So you go off and you create these dictionary steps, you apply them, you incorporate them into the database, you test those changes, and if they worked out, fantastic. Then you can go ahead and deploy those off into your staging environment or what have you. If you've discovered that there's a problem, more than likely, you're going to go ahead and make more changes to that dictionary step, restore your database, and then go back, apply those dictionary steps again in sequence, and then continue testing. And that's basically the complete cycle. Yeah, sorry about that. So here's a tool that I used. Basically, I created this tool to be able to learn about continuous database. It was very nice. And at the same time, I also incorporated the previous code generators that we had made available on the DevNet community site. So inside here, you got a few different capabilities. You got the ability to back up a database. You can also restore a database. You got the code generation window, and then comes the dictionary step, how you would apply your dictionary steps. Backup and restore, these capabilities exist inside the SuperOffice CD libraries. So if you want to go ahead and leverage these and create backup inside your own database, you can do that. It's no problem. And this tool is available for download in a compiled version right now, but I want to clean it up because the coding is a little bit embarrassing. Like I said, I was learning CDD at the time. But this will be up on GitHub very shortly so that you guys can go ahead and see how it works and use it yourself. So once you've got your code, your dictionary step, and you're ready to go, just remain calm and deploy it into production. You guys want to see it in real time? Yeah. All right. Okay. So here I've got a Visual Studio project. Nope. I do. You do now. Okay. So a Visual Studio project called Bank Dictionary Step. I've got 4 steps defined here. So let's go ahead and just easily walk through each one of them. I'll blow this up if I need to. Whoa. All right, here we go. So this dictionary step, the name is called DevNet Bank. This is step number 1. The only thing I'm going to be doing in here is creating a table called bank with no description. Next thing I want to do is set the table properties. Table properties define things like how it's going to be replicated in your travel databases. Next thing I'll go ahead and define are your field properties. And in this case, I've only got 2 primary ones called name and trusted. And then there's these nice macro methods that are built in so that I can add in the registered and updated fields. These will add in 5 columns behind the scenes for me. Registered, registered date, registered by associate, those sort of things. So if we look at step number 2, step number 2 is going to just modify the bank table, and it's going to add a description. That's all it's going to do. Nothing extraordinary. Then I've got step 3 here, and you'll notice that I haven't done anything with the structure, but I have implemented the imp file names method, which will return an imp file name where I have data that I actually want to seed into this table. If I look down here into my imp files folder structure, I have some simple seed data here for bank. Now, I have the application DevNet here running, the DevNet toolbox. Let me go ahead and show that to you. And I want to go ahead and apply these changes of this dictionary step. I've already previously compiled it, so I'll click on the Apply Changes button. I'll choose Scan for dictionary steps, and it discovers those 3 dictionary steps and lists them off. It will tell me that they have not been applied into the database, and we can go ahead and verify that by looking at the database. You can see that there's no table in here called bank. So we'll come back, and then I'll go ahead and just apply the first two steps. It goes off rather quickly. Successfully applied those to the database. So now if I come back here and I refresh the tables, we'll now have the bank table. I can go ahead and select it, see that there's no data in it at this time. So if I go back to the tool, and I scan for dictionary steps now it detects that step 1 and step 2 have applied. If I try and select on them, I can't. There's no reason to reapply an existing step. So then I want to go ahead and deploy step 3, apply that to the database. Remember, that's the one that contains the seed data. So you can see now my step number is increased to 3. If I come back to the database, I go ahead and re-execute that select. Now the data is in the database. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. All right. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, I also want to be able to delete that table. So with the help and questioning from our partners InfoBridge, helped us let us know that we needed to be able to remove these things from the database. So the way that you do that is you define another dictionary step, you give it the same name, but now you set the step number to int.maxValue. With that in place, you want to be able to clean up your database, or clean up all of the changes that you did to your database for all of those dictionary steps. So in this case, I've got another solution here. Let me share this with you. And then this one, instead of using the tool, I'm going to use code. Let me get rid of this. Let's bring this up a little bit. All right. So here is the way that we go ahead and apply a dictionary step using code. Let me see if I can back that down just a hair. Whoa. Okay. So I'm going to use I need to create a connection to the database using the CDD provider connection facilities. I don't really have to distinguish whether it's Oracle or Sybase or SQL Server. It knows how to do all that. So get a connection. You're going to pass that into database management in order to create a database management object, which is where you're going to be spending most of your time managing that database. I'm going to read the database model directly from the database. This is an 8.1 database, so it's going to go ahead and grab all those tables from the information from the database model table, read that in memory. I'm going to create a linked list here of dictionary steps. Now you can see I'm just instantiating my bank step 4, which inherits from dictionary step. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the database management to apply that dictionary step, which goes in as a linked list, because sometimes, more likely than not, you're going to want to apply more dictionary steps than just one. And then you pass in the database model. The result of that will let you know if it succeeded or not, and then any of what was changed. Or not what was changed, but the object. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this code. It's going to run over here, but that's okay. Just F10 past that. Nothing special, nothing happens. Not getting any errors, so I'll just finish that. I'll come back to the tool. I'm just going to go ahead and reconnect to that same database to refresh it. And now you can see that the devnet.bank dictionary steps is gone. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. No. So originally, when we were thinking about this, we said, okay, we came up with this workflow. We were like, okay, we want you to create the dictionary step, have that applied to the database, go ahead, test those changes, and then if anything was wrong, go ahead and make changes to the dictionary step, restore your database, and then reapply the new dictionary step with changes. What I'm proposing now is that you discard the whole backup and restore capability. You want to back up just in case, but get into the habit of creating a dictionary step, and every single time you make a modification, make sure you undo the modification in your uninstall dictionary step, the one with the int.max value. That way when you create a table, you have a drop table. If you modify or create a field in that table, do the whole drop field first before you drop the table, or else you probably run into problems. Otherwise, you can just think about that. You can do it all completely in code so that you can create your dictionary steps, apply your dictionary steps, and then unapply your dictionary steps all programmatically. Something to think about. Okay. Eric, how do I do this? Here we go. Bulk update. Bulk update's another one where I spent a lot of time in recently. And the basic fundamentals are, as you saw Eric inside the application, is really, really powerful. And this is something that you really need to know what you're doing, otherwise you're going to end up causing havoc within your database. So understanding the concepts is that there are fields, there are entities of things that you want to work with. And in this case, it's just, it's a person, but it could be an appointment, contact, document, person, sales selection. These are the things that you're used to working with inside SuperOffice. The very first thing you need to have is basically an array of IDs of entities you want to work with. So I want to work with all of the contacts whose name starts with S. Then I'm going to need to know all of their contact IDs in order to be able to work with them programmatically. Then I want to be able to know what is the criteria that I'm working with. Very similar to when you're doing a search or a selection, you've got the criteria up and you're saying, okay, in this entity, in this field, here's my criteria. The company name starts with S, or the title in this case equals salesperson. The operation type is what is it that you want to do with this contact or this person. And then the values that you want to go ahead and change, the values that you want to update. So as it appears inside SuperOffice, like Eric alluded to, bulk update is available on every single archive that's out there. So no matter if you're in a selection or if you're in a list of appointments or looking at a list of contacts, you select a lot of them, you can right-click, choose bulk update, and update that information. The screen that you see, the bulk update screen, looks and feels just like the selection criteria page, and then also the login capability that Eric alluded to. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at how this would work in code. Anytime you're going to be working within NetServer, and this is all inside NetServer. So I need to create a valid session so I can query the database. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and create a select. I'm going to get all the contacts where the name starts with S. Then I'm going to basically get all of the company IDs, and as long as there are some. Now I need to talk about those 3 specific things in order to create a bulk update. First, I need to get the actual field that I'm interested in manipulating. And in this case, I'm interested in the interests. So I'm going to get all of the contact fields, and I'm going to set their key to the add interest field. The operation is going to be, for example, I had said set before on a person. In this case, I want to add items. So I want to be able to add interests to a lot of these contacts. Then I have to specify the values of those interests. In this case, it's a brand new database. I got 3 interests, valued 1, 2, and 3. If we look at the client, logging into a, I'm going, I'm a risk taker, so I'm going out and showing you dev stuff, right? Let's show you development straight out of patch 80, eh, guys? Okay, so I've got these companies, and then for the interests, all I have is major account, prestige, and reference. SuperOffice Software Limited. If I cancel on this, you'll see I've got another one. Oh, too far forward. Back, Starbucks, Sears, Sabco. I want to go ahead and set all of these guys with interests. So I'm going to go back to the code, and once I've got the basic details for this field value info, I'm going to go ahead and create this background job, which takes in its constructor the name of the entity that I want to work with. In this case, it's the contact or company. I'm going to specify the field values that I want to set on these companies, and then I'm going to pass in the IDs of those companies that I want to update. On the update job, I'm going to go ahead and call update field async, and then that's going to execute, and I just want to go ahead and hang out here and let that do its job. I'm in a console application, so I'll just go ahead and let it do it, hang out, do a simple while statement. When it's done, it'll just go ahead and pass by that. So let's go ahead. We'll just set a breakpoint here. Let's just run it. Whoops. Let's just wing it, shall we? All right. Hit the debugger, going to select our contacts. Make sure we got some companies here. In fact, we got 4 of them. So we're going to pass by there. We're going to get the contacts interest fields. We're going to go ahead and set that to add items, specify that I want these interests to be set, and I just execute it. And I hang out here until it's done. It doesn't take long. It's very fast. You saw Eric do it. It doesn't take any time at all. So now when I come back into the web client, I'll just refresh this so we can see updated values. And now you can see that Sabco has the interest set, Sears has the interest set, Starbucks has the interest set, and so does in SuperOffice. It's that easy. And you can see that I'm inside the web client, right? And Eric showed you and told you that it's in the Windows client. Well, I'm here to tell you, you can see it for yourself. The web client has that functionality coming to a theater near you soon. So if I come in here, I have a selection called companies that start with S. I right-click on it. Oh, it's a selection. So that's going to be now up in tasks. There's bulk update. Go ahead and choose company. Window's a little bit small. Bulk update. Make sure it's not coming up on here. Yeah, you see the interest add. I want to remove the interest. Thank you. And yeah, yeah. So that's the web client, guys. It's coming. It's there. Yeah, don't be shy. Use it. Let's see, contacts. If I look at Maria, bulk updates there, and then if I want to update some information there. Now, but just to show you that it is coming to web, which basically means what I'm showing you inside NetServer is going to be there in the services layer as well very, very soon. If I want to do the same sort of reverse update in code, basically I would want to go through here and change add interest to remove interest. And then down below, instead of add items, let's say remove items, execute that code. Takes just a second to authenticate, get past that screen. Let's just F5 past that, same there. It's done. Come back to the web client, refresh it, and you can see all those interests are gone. It's as easy as that. When it comes to GDPR, I don't really have a lot to talk about. Christian Mogensen and Marek Wilczak are going to have a detailed session on that tomorrow. Basically, all I want to say is, it's all about the who, the what, the how, and the why. And they've thought about these things quite thoroughly. Eric went through this in a magnificent fashion earlier today. So it's coming. The APIs are going to be there to support it. It's nothing new in terms of the APIs or some new tables, but a lot of the existing APIs that you use are going to be extremely familiar. Person entity, person agent, and list agent, all that stuff resides underneath there. Go check out that session if you want to learn how you're going to deal with GDPR programmatically. When it comes to skill, SuperOffice client interface language, these are created in the modifications like you saw with the inbox and also chat. Don't panic. Everything that you've done for all your on-site installation modifications, I can think of a couple big accounts that are out there where you did some very tremendous things. You took the web client and you turned it into something that completely doesn't look like SuperOffice CRM, but it is. And that's cool. Don't panic, because all that stuff still works. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. In fact, when we were looking at the person card earlier today, when Eric was giving his presentation, and he had that toggle button that showed you the different type of mail-ins that somebody had wanted to receive. That toggle button, that was a skill component, and that's implemented at the control level. Skill is going to be discussed in detail tomorrow by Jürgen, and also there's another session that shows you how to build a standalone site from scratch by Anders. I highly recommend that if you're interested in learning this stuff, go and check out both of those sessions. Right, so recommended path going forward, learn about the concepts that these things provide. Learn about the recipes, the layouts, the components, the different behaviors that you can create, and how to be able to apply these things. So it's still fluid is probably the best word. So a lot of the stuff that you see and work with is not going to go away. So everything that you learn about today is going to still be relevant in another year or two, but some of the underlying components may change. The way that you work with factories might change, but they're still going to be there. So I highly recommend that you learn about these things. And like Svata had talked about earlier, these things are just snappy and fast, and yeah, it's contemporary web application. So talking about the future. The future is always kind of interesting, and Super ID is at the foundation of all of our online development. You can't get past the guard, if you will, and Super ID is the guard for our online real estate. There's a lot of sort of shortcomings, though, that we've run into, a lot of requests that are coming in for certain functionalities and behaviors in the online environment for all CRM customers, but we're still sort of, we've outgrown our shoes, for that sort of metaphor. So what we're trying to do is bring that forward and figure out the things that we know the things that we don't know, and we're trying to improve on them. There are cases out there where users get locked out because of complicated decentralized authentication. If you're a developer, and I'm going to come back to this later, and you've created a snapshot of your production database because you want to be able to work with it, and then all of a sudden, after you've been working on this for a couple days, you need to ask a question on community because you need to figure out something, so you're going to go to the forums and ask a question, but then you can't log in. Well, this is caused by that database that you copied and had been working with, and you didn't really know about some of these things that I'll point out on how to prevent that. But decentralized authentication means a lot of different things. Think about when you authenticate in an on-site installation, that's one authentication. When you authenticate into community, that's another type of authentication. When you log into an online tenant, that's another type of authentication. It's a lot of decentralized authentications, and we're sort of run into some problems that I think we need to get fixed, and we have a pretty clear vision of how to do those things, how to fix those. It's complicated to introduce expected security features like multi-factor authentication. That's anybody here not want multi-factored authentication? Right. So some of the things that we're working on, it's going to improve upon that. Simplify the authentication. We need to centralize the authentication mechanisms that we have in place. We need to start from scratch. We need to build a new set of shoes so that we can know how to walk the walk, talk the talk. We need to be able to separate the user's login ID from their email address connected to a specific associate. We also need to introduce the next generation of Super ID that can be used on all systems across the entire SuperOffice online real estate. So we're raising the expectations here. We got to get these new pair of shoes on. Customers expect to be able to securely authenticate the users regardless of where they're coming from or what actions they're trying to do within the SuperOffice environment. You want to safeguard against any of the online threats that are out there, and there are many. Use the same credentials across, again, the entire SuperOffice real estate for all of our services. We want to make it easier to be able to facilitate a lot of different things, including the GDPR functionality. We want partners to be able to manage their own applications and the customers that they work with in the online environment. I laugh because I think about all of the days and times that I talk a lot with the support team that you guys communicate with when you send emails to appdev@superoffice.com, and it's like, I need to change the endpoint, I need to be able to change my certificate, I want this added functionality, and all of that has to be an email exchange. I know the pains that we have internally in order to trying to keep up with all of those requests, and I know that you feel a pain as well because of the delays that you have to have in order to continue your development. Wouldn't it be great to be able to self-service yourself inside the online environment, specifically with your applications and then your customers that are using your applications? You want expected security features. You want this multi-factored authentication. You want to be able to set better password policies. You also want to bet geolocation capabilities so that if you log in somewhere here in Norway, and then to be able to get a notification that somebody just tried to log in with your credentials from China, those sort of things. Throttle logins so that if you forget your password and you type in the wrong thing a few times, you're going to get nagged, but hopefully there'll be a wizard to help you through that a little bit. Just like that bill that's up there, you want to implement a lot of different security gates, if you will, to improve the security of the online environment. And basically, we want to give you the gold key. We want to be able to use a single access, one key that will get you into SuperOffice Online, your SuperOffice on-site installations, easy self-service inside the partner portal for applications that are coming later, probably later next year. Okay. SuperOffice SDK, everybody's favorite tool. Yeah, sometimes it's hard, okay? It's been a baby for a long time, and when you have to say that baby's become a redheaded stepchild. It's hard. Every single one of you, as a partners, come to SuperOffice. The first thing you need to do is to figure out how to do whatever it is your boss told you you need to do. How do you do this integration? How do you create this archive controller? How do you add a new tab? How do you do whatever inside SuperOffice to customize it? Well, you go and you look, of course, at the developer documentation page, and this is what you run up against. You run up into this thing that highlights COM APIs. You don't necessarily know they're COM APIs, they're just called IApplication and IDatabase, and you have to drill down into it in order to figure out what it means. And then we got a few other client APIs that are out there. iApplication, specifically dealing with the Windows client, customer service, and the web client. And then there's the data access libraries. You can see it's sort of a tic-tac-toe, a hodgepodge, if you will, of documentations. And so when you come and look at that page, I know the pain that you feel because your boss told you you need to do this, and you look at this and you're saying, I don't know where to even begin. So, yeah, it's been a pain for a long time. So I know your pain when you come to the website on the forums and you ask a question, how do I do this? And I go and I look and I go to this same page and I drill down into the documentation so that I can provide you a link to how that's explained inside the SDK. And sometimes that takes a lot longer than I had hoped it would. So I want to go ahead and make that a lot easier. So the way I'm going to restructure it is by the client. So we're going to go ahead and revamp the entire SDK the way that you look at it. All of the information is there. I would say probably 90% of it for all of the customizations that you could ever possibly want to do is there. It just needs to be formatted in such a way that makes it easily discoverable. And the way that most people, I think, feel about this is that it's the same way you ask a question. If you want to be able to make a modification inside the Windows client, you go to and you ask a question on the Windows forums. If you want to make modifications or a document plugin, you go to the NetServer forum. Even that's kind of complicated because a document plugin, you shouldn't have to know that you need to go to NetServer documentation to figure out how to do it. So we want to be able to make these things a lot more discoverable, and so we're going to format it by the client. So if you want to make changes in the Windows client, you can go there. And you'll see all the Windows client specific things that you can do, but then there's also going to be easy intuitive links across all of the platforms that share extensibilities. And these share extensibilities can be anything as simple as user-defined fields and web panels all the way down into skill, which will be coming later next year. The documentation will also contain all the details in order to create more functionality, or not more functionality, but better explanations for the functionality and extensibilities that you can do at all of the lower layers as well. Coming back to the community sign-in problem. I give this sort of a big upfront, couple of minutes I want to talk about it because I think it's pretty important. Almost everybody in here creates customizations or copies of production databases, and you do customizations against that production database. I'm not necessarily convinced that everybody knows about this little preference out there. And this little preference can cause problems. When you first install your application and then you sign in, you're going to eventually see this dialog. And this dialog basically specifies that you're going to allow some of your information to be sent back to SuperOffice. Inside the application, inside admin client, there's this statistics setting. Inside there, statistics opt-in, user sync opt-in. And these are the values that you don't shut off when you take a copy of your database. So it's left on. So when you start working against your production database, it's sending back basically replicating information from your production database that you've copied, and your information is now being sent back to SuperOffice. And do you know what happens when you try and log into NetServer and your database has multiple email addresses for the same associate? Login will fail. So then when you do that, unbeknownst to you, whether it's a few minutes later or an hour later, you've probably gotten an email from SuperOffice support and saying, it looks like you're having problems logging into the community website. Can we help you? Anybody ever? No, nobody. I'm not going to ask that. But this is why. So I want you guys to make sure that when you create a copy of your production database so that you can do additional customizations, set these values to 0. Go in there, look for the preference section, data collection, find config user sync, and configure statistics, and set it to 0. Okay? And that way you'll eliminate any of your login problems on the community website. Now, this is one of the problems that I kind of alluded to before when I was talking about Super ID. By creating this centralized user management, we're going to get away from these problems. So that's when we solve that problem for Super ID, it's going to solve this as well, and you might not have to think about that user preference then, but until that's done, please be aware of that function. So turn off all of the data collection preferences so that you're not sending us your serial numbers and making it more confusing for us. Don't mean to whine or cry about it. We're trying to do each other a favor here. Eric alluded and Gautam alluded, I don't know, anybody here scared about the deployment schedule for 8.2 and you see it's going to be rolled out every 3 weeks? Do you mind if I ask you what scares you? When you're running plugins inside SuperOffice, what's going to happen? Boom. When you install or you do an upgrade to SuperOffice and you've got a plugin and it's running inside the instance, the session of NetServer that's running, compiled against a different version, you're going to run into problems. Your application is no longer going to work. Now, we alluded to this way back when we introduced 7. There's a very well-known and documented capability to set assembly bindings inside your configuration files. Every .NET application has a configuration file. Every single one of them has the ability to set a runtime element, and inside there you set assembly bindings so that you can say, when SuperOffice upgrades from version 8.1 to 8.2, your assemblies that were compiled against SuperOffice 8.0 will still be able to work with SuperOffice 8.2. We're going to put out an article about this on the community website because I think this sort of maybe needs to be clarified a little bit. When you use the NuGet packages, I'm going to have a, here's my moment of confession. Last night, I'm staying up, I'm working with Continuous Database, working on this demo for you that I showed you today. And of course, I want to be able to use the NuGet packages. Actually, sorry, it was the bulk update example. So I'm working with the bulk update example. And what do? First thing, I create a console application, and I do install package from NuGet, get superoffice.netserver.core. I get it, it's running, it compiles, fantastic. I run it, boom. I get an error that says Newtonsoft JSON 8.0 library wasn't found or isn't compatible with the one that's currently running. You know, the one I saw that was included inside the SuperOffice package was 6.0. It was looking for 8.0. So somewhere underneath the covers in R&D, somebody flipped that bit and said, okay, in this version of SuperOffice 8.1, we're going to be shipping with or working against Newsoft JSON 8.0. Forgot to tell me, or didn't care, just said, all right, we need this. We're going to compile it, deploy it, server setup, we'll install it, who cares? So I create the package, automated it like I do every day. It gets pushed out there. And now it thinks it's going to work with 6.0. SuperOffice is expecting 8.0, and it won't run. So what do? It's actually quite simple. All you need to do is go into the NuGet settings inside the application and choose to update the Newtonsoft that your application is running for. So manage NuGet package. It's going to find all the packages that your application depends on. I come in here, I find Newtonsoft JSON. It was set to run against 6.0. I now upgraded to 8.0, and you saw the application run. So it's about using these assembly bindings and the NuGet package dependencies in your favor. Let's go ahead. So assembly bindings are your friend. So when it comes to SuperOffice 8.2 rolling out every few weeks in this series of updates, don't be afraid of your assemblies. Now, the installers, the SuperOffice installers need to be smarter. So now when you do an upgrade from a previous version of SuperOffice, it's going to look inside the configuration file and it will increment the values accordingly. So your assemblies that were compiled against a previous version of NetServer will still continue to work. The new installers, however, still need to be updated, and I believe that will be in place for 8.2 and when that starts to roll out. Yeah. So as you can see, it's been a pretty busy 2017. It's been a busy year, and I showed you the bulk update in the web client and online and the web services. That's coming. Personification or personify and GDPR is coming to all SuperOffice. Unified login, that term still has yet to be solidified. Super ID. Skill is still up and coming. It's still in a fluid state, but don't be afraid to get your hands dirty with it. And look out for SuperOffice SDK documentation. Is online documentation good enough for everybody? I see Microsoft has moved to docs.microsoft.com. All their documentation stuff available in Git. A lot of people are moving in that direction. We've already moved all of our documentation over to Git, and all of these, the newer documentation that we're going to be creating is also going to be in Git. Is that good for everybody? Good. Thank you. All right, that's it. I've been Tony Yates. You guys have been awesome. Thanks.